tell you the truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Zac and Caleb Show. I'm Caleb. Zac is behind the camera. Say hi, Zac.
What's up, guys?
Hopefully you heard that. Today, we are just shooting an episode that was not planned, but we're on another project right now. I met Hendrina through this project, and I was like, I have to get my opportunity to talk to her because I think she has amazing wisdom. And so I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and then I think people will hear more about you, obviously, through your story. But you've been married for 40 years to your wonderful husband, Doug.
Yep.
Doug was incarcerated for part of that time, which essentially rendered you a single mother in the home while you're still married. But you were responsible for raising your kids, working, keeping the house in order, and all of that stuff. And as we were talking off camera about this, you said that part of what needed to happen was for God to intervene supernaturally for healing, to bring you guys together, to keep you guys together. And then you also said for other people who are in similar situations, there is a supernatural intervention that needs to happen. And so my question for you is, everybody has family issues. Everybody has broken families. Everybody has people in their families and relationships that don't necessarily get along or that run smoothly and all that stuff. The holidays are coming up. A lot of people are going to be sitting down across from people, especially in an election year, where that brokenness might come to the forefront. And the reason I wanted to hear what you had to say is because I don't think a lot of people think about God intervening in their family supernaturally. Usually when we talk about supernatural stuff, it's miracles of healing or provision or God coming through in this crazy way. But I think you hit it on the head. When we're talking about relationships, there's a supernatural intervention that needs to happen sometimes. And I would love to hear just your thoughts on that and maybe some wisdom you can give to people through your own experience, but also through your relationship with Jesus himself.
Yeah, and thanks for asking that question. It's kind of a loaded question, right? But, people have asked me through the years, well, I don't know how you stayed together with your husband, how you could forgive him for doing that to you and to your kids. And this is where the supernatural part comes in, right? Well, we had a pastor who said to us, there's two parts to this. There's forgiveness and there's forgetting. And sometimes we like to lump those as one. And I really hadn't heard it that way before. And it took me a minute to process that. And he said, you can forgive someone without forgetting that happened. And I'm not saying I had that all figured out in the beginning, but what I have come to understand is that the forgiveness because of where we were, and we were both at that point just broken in ways that I can't even express. You can imagine, but the forgiveness truly came because of who God is and the work He's done within my life. I couldn't forgive anybody on my own. And so that's where that part of that came. And that came through a lot of prayer and a lot of looking even at myself. Like, if I can't forgive him, well, what about all of the XYZ I've done in my life? Why would the expectation be that anyone would forgive me? And it always brings me back to, God's forgiven me through Jesus. And so how is it that I can't forgive what He's done within our family? Now, does that mean that I forget that happened? Well, no. I mean, I don't. I lived it. We lived it together. Our kids lived it. I didn't forget any of it. But I can put that aside. Now, it took time. It wasn't like I just snapped my fingers and it was done. But I was able to say, okay, this did happen, but I can forgive that. And I would never in a million years have been able to done that under my own strength. That really is the supernatural part of that. And I take that into a lot of my families, because to your point, families are messy, right? You could pick your friends. But your family is who you're born with, into, and who they are. And I think our challenge always is because we have expectations about our family. Well, they should think like us. They should talk like us. They should have the same type of relationships, the love of, we talk about politics, the same, we should believe the same thing. And we don't think twice about saying to our friends, well, yeah, you think like that, that's okay. But when it comes to family, we have these expectations where we don't think that they should be that way. So then we don't either have those conversations. We don't forgive the times when they have emotionally wounded us. And so I would say that is a challenge, and it's a challenge. It's even a challenge for me still. But if I'm able to really pray about that and think about how God's gotten me through probably the darkest part of my life, that's how I try to carry that in every relationship. Do I fail at that? Well, yeah, I do. I have to constantly bring it back and say, how am I supposed to forgive that? But it comes back to, yeah, it's about God forgave me, Jesus forgave me. Who am I to not offer the same grace to someone else? And so that's the supernatural part I think we tend to miss. And it doesn't mean that you forget the hurt, but you can move past it if you start with forgiveness first. And then you can start to move on.
I love that forgiveness, I believe, and obviously we see this in our faith, is the genesis point. That is the beginning, and you can't really start anywhere else in our relationship with God, but with people that are broken or that have hurt you. But I think there is a journey after the forgiveness, like you were saying. And so I would love for you to narrow it down maybe. Let's talk about, if you're willing, how prayer has, your own personal prayer and maybe the prayers of the people around you, has contributed to, again, the supernatural healing that starts with forgiveness. And then I believe God starts this process of healing in our hearts where, we don't forget, but when we get healed, or in that process of healing, when you remember, maybe it doesn't hurt so much, maybe it doesn't affect your behavior so much, maybe you don't treat them the way that you used to treat them, whether it was good or bad, but there is this progress of healing that, again, I believe is supernatural, and that can only come through prayer. So if you want to share a little bit on how prayer and healing intermingle in your own life.
Yeah, so I'm still on that journey. Right? It doesn't end just because I forgave. In this case, we'll talk about Doug. I'm still on that journey because when certain times of year come up or certain things come up, there comes that part where you don't forget. And so it's a constant battle. I often feel like, Satan's there just trying to stir something. And so it's a constant battle of me sitting in that spot where at night, he's sleeping away, where I have to pray about, and I pray for my friends who are going through things, but I also have to remind myself about the forgiveness part, because it's just like everything else. It's like you have to constantly be in that mindset of remembering, that muscle memory of, yes, I forgave here, but as I'm journeying through and walking through every day, and something comes at me as a reminder of, oh, there it is again. How do I approach that within my head and in my heart? And that's why it's a constant. I drive in my car and think, okay, help me through this, because it does come up. And even though I've gone through the forgiveness part, that peace that constantly always wants to remind me of where we've been, because sometimes I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to remember where I've been or where we've gone as a family. I just want it to go away. And that's why sometimes I bury that down. But it does come up. And so how do you deal with that at the time? And you deal with it right away. I mean, for me, I sit here and I have to take a moment. I have an office by myself where sometimes I just close the door and I put my head in my hands and I just go, help me through this. Remind me of really who he is. I'm not talking about Doug. I'm talking about the big who he is, and that it's okay. And it's a daily struggle. So the journey doesn't end. It's a constant thing. Every time something negative comes up, or somebody says something that triggers that memory or that piece of my life, I really have to remind myself of we've gotten through that and we continue to get through that. I continue to get through that. And the only way I can do it is taking that time out and really having that conversation with God. And I have those quite often during the day. A lot of time it's in the car. I have to turn off my radio as I'm thinking something's coming up, and if I don't do that, then I just plow through life. So I have to be in that mindset of silence. But the journey, it's an ongoing journey, and even though we have struggles even within my own family, and even though I've forgiven some of the things that they've said, and they never said anything to be mean spirited. They were watching out for me. But I received it that way. And so I even have to forgive my own self for thinking that way. And so it's a constant, okay, and not keeping score every time that someone says something or someone brings me back to that place, or even if Doug says something or brings me back to that place, it's not keeping score. And that's the journey. And that's why, for me, I have to prayerfully remind myself that God's not keeping score. And I tend to do that. And I need to let that go. And that's a daily struggle. And it's a struggle that can only be overcome by the amount of time you spend in conversation with God.
It's all really good. I think this will be my last question, but maybe you'll say something that triggers something else. When we are talking about children, and I'm not just talking about children that are under the age of 18, but obviously that's where they start as a parent. But they grow up to be adults and they're still children. And so with that relationship in mind, as for you as a mother, and you have physical kids, and I'm sure you're a wise woman, I'm sure you have a lot of spiritual kids out there as well. But when it comes to parenting, and I want to maybe focus on parenting spiritually here, and you see the wounds that they have, and like Zac and I were talking about with you, we have youth students and kids in our church who have been wounded by their parents, and they have to navigate that forgiveness and that healing and all of that stuff. But talk to me a little bit about, spiritually, how do you care for kids who come from broken families, who are maybe wounded deeply more than they ever should have been at a young age? But that's the reality of our world. And even right now, like in America, it's like most kids grow up in a broken family. They don't have two parents in the home. So that it's a common problem right now. What is some wisdom you can share for people who are listening, who are like, man, I volunteer at church with the kids or with the youth, or I have a niece or a nephew, or even my own kids. I'm trying to restore this relationship or heal their heart or heal their spirit, especially towards Jesus. What is something maybe you would say, some wisdom that you would maybe give those people?
Yeah, it's hard because we don't know to the extent that some of these kids were wounded, and we talk about that in the prison all the time about childhood wounds. And you can listen to grown men talk about their wounds as kids. And I think and what I've seen, and we have friends that are youth work with middle schoolers, and I think the key really is showing up. Is showing up every day and being that safe person. It may take years before those kids say in their head, oh yeah, they're the same person day after day after day, because people have failed them over, and they know that. They know what that is. What they don't know is who is that safe person? Who is that consistent person? Because they don't know what that means for them. And so how do you shift that narrative in their head where, yep, they get what, that's why that's their defense mechanism, is to constantly push back, because they understand that. They've been disappointed. They've been hurt. And so how do you fight against that is making sure that you're already pushing against that before it even happens to you. And so for them, it really is, I believe, as being what Doug was for us as a family, is showing up every day, being that consistent person every time. And then allowing people, if they want to swear at you because it's not you, but they're just about the day, it's fine. Let it go. And you're there to listen. You're listening. It's no judgment. It's not trying to fix things, because as I said before, we can't fix what happened there, but we can provide a safe space when they're ready, if they're ready, because sometimes the reality may be they may never be ready. But that doesn't mean that we can't just be that consistent person, that person that just allows them the freedom to speak the way they want to speak, to be angry when they want to be angry, because they will. I've had plenty of those myself. And trying to just as Doug was saying in one of our episodes where he was just laying on the concrete with our son, is just being there. I think in working with kids, I remember saying, if I can make a difference in one child, and I've worked with kids for over 20 years, in one life, I've made a difference. Because we don't have control over where they're going home, who they're going home to. But when they're with you, you can have those honest conversations, and what they need is truth. They've been lied to. They've been beaten down emotionally. They need truth. They need honest, kind words and truth. And I think when that happens, I had a student that, oh my gosh, it was difficult because she didn't want to care for herself. She didn't care about herself. And she was in and out of the hospital for so many years. And I thought, finally, by the end, she trusted me enough that we could work together. But it took so long. And that's what I'm saying when we talk about journeys. We are in it for the long haul. And that's what they need to see. They don't want to see that, because I've heard this before, well, you're just trying to do your ministry, pretty soon you're going to go away, because everybody goes away. They know that. That's what they're used to. They need to see that you're not going anywhere, that you're in it for the long haul, and whatever that looks like. But that's what they need to see. And I'd say it's hard work. You may not see the fruit of what you've been giving them for all these years, but you don't know what's been instilled in their head, and down the road, that aha moment may come for them. And that, I guess that's what I hold on to, is that I've seen it happen. where I've seen it when they were elementary school kids, and then I've seen it when they became high schoolers. And the blessing and beauty of that is sometimes you do see it. And sometimes you may not. That doesn't mean it won't happen. So I would say
really
just keep on keeping on. And
yeah, I'd like to add to that and just share the story and then make my point after. But I have a buddy who, he's an adult now, obviously, and parents went through a divorce. It, fractured his relationship with his dad. And I actually got to talk with them both in the same room. And I just said, like, what, you guys have such a strong relationship now. And after hearing your story, that's like pretty wild. And so I asked the dad, I was like, what changed and what helped? And he said, there was a time where my son set a pretty hard boundary with me where he didn't really want to see me very often. He said, I knew I had to respect that, but I also knew I wasn't going to go anywhere. And so what he ended up doing was, I don't know how long of a period of time, but his son had a job. And so he would bring his son lunch every single week. And then he said one week he couldn't come, and his son texted him and said, where are you? And he kind of knew, okay, like he wasn't saying thank you. He wasn't even giving, but this was something that his son was looking forward to and expecting. And when he wasn't there, he noticed, and he said like that. And so the reason I share that story is if you're listening to this and, you are a youth leader, or maybe you have a kid who has set boundaries with you, and you're like, well, how can I be consistent if they're pushing me away? That's where I would encourage you is you're not compromising the boundaries, but you need to find those little things where you can be consistent. For example, Doug said, he's in prison. How is he going to be consistent with his kids? He wrote letters.
Yep.
And, whether the kid reads them or not, like that is you being consistent, that it's like, okay, I can expect mail from dad every other Monday, or, whatever it is. And you wouldn't believe what that does for the psyche of a child. And so my encouragement for anybody listening to this, where you're trying to restore relationships or even be there for a kid who you don't even have a responsibility to, but you want to love them. Maybe it's at youth group, and maybe it's just showing up every single Wednesday, and they're not talking in small groups. Doesn't matter. Show up, write them a letter, give them a note at youth group. Bring candy. Like, there are things that you can do that are small that do add up. Yep. And then, like you said, over time, there might be that moment where it's like, hey, this and this happened. Like, I remember one of my buddies who's a youth pastor was saying, we had he had this girl in his youth group, and every time he was around her, like just shut, like not even like a hi or what's up. But then he had a newborn child, and he was holding her in this group, and she said, can I hold your kid? And he let her. And now he says their relationship, they talk every single time she opens up to him. Like, and so you never know when it's going to happen. And that is the supernatural healing and like the move of God. But it requires you to say yes to God first and say, like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be as consistent as I possibly can. And you can watch those boundaries extend further into their heart and into their soul. So I just wanted to share that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I love that. And I just think that for our kids, and again, it's prayer, a lot of prayer for those kids, because again, they've been in dark, dark spots. And by showing up, when you were talking about the boundaries, I love that they may extend those boundaries, because I've seen that. I did Young Lives for a bit. And so what that is, it's walking alongside our teen moms. And this particular student had great family. I mean, I'm like, why am I here? But you could see little by little she was letting me in, because I had to prove who I was too. Because again, like, am I going to show up? But yeah, I think for ministry, it's hard because we want to see the resolution right away. But I love the fact that happened with that student. or that child, where then their relationship is great. So yeah, kudos on the work you guys are doing with that, because it's definitely God's work, but by no means does it mean it's easy work, because I've heard it, we hear it on the way to the prison with two of the guys that work with middle schoolers. They love it, wouldn't trade it for anything, but they've had big challenges, but they meet them head on. And the fruit that came out of that is they've built these relationships with the most difficult students, and it's been great.
It's awesome. Praise God. All right. Well, thank you so much for jumping in impromptu. And
it's my pleasure.
This was a great conversation. I know it's going to help a lot of people. It helped me. And so thank you again so much.
Thank you. My honor, actually. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Love you guys. We'll see you next time.